So happy you're here today. Thank you so much for joining us. We thank you to Leo and Karla for joining us as well to talk about creativity. Today we are going to cover off on the challenges of driving relevance in a sea of content and cutting through the noise with creatively inspired strategies and ideas. So that is going to be the subject matter. We're going to dig into it. It's very interesting to be a creative lead at a influencer marketing summit. It definitely kind of shows the changing of the tides over the past few years and how the landscape is really developing. So I'm excited to be here and dig into this in front of all you guys. I'm going to let Leo and Karla tell you a little bit about themselves. So Leo or Karla, please.
Hi, I'm Karla Ruiz. I'm social media director at Casanova, a Hispanic advertising agency in Orange County. And I oversee everything social for our clients. So from content strategy, influencer marketing, channel management, you name it.
I'm Leonardo Garcia. I manage brand programs at YouTube Space here in LA. For those of you not familiar with YouTube Space, we're basically a production facility from Google/YouTube for creators. And my work's basically enabling creators/influencers to work with brands. So it's exactly aligned with this new transformation and this new change that we are seeing in the industry.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So the first thing that I want to dig in today is kind of the new landscape within the creative space, which is, you know, what used to work on Instagram and YouTube, the typical cute pictures of cats and everything that was great in 2012 doesn't work anymore. It's a sea of content creators that are out there, and you know, basically. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But everybody shares content. Even my 11-year-old niece wants to be an influencer rather than a lawyer or a doctor at this point. So everybody is a content creator. There's hundreds of apps out there that everybody can use to make perfect pastel feeds. So the bar is really high. Content can't just be content anymore. So with all that being said, a good influencer marketing campaign has to have a great idea behind it to bring out the best in the talent and the influencer. So I want to start with the brief that goes into a great creative concept. And I want to start with Karla to sort of talk about the briefing process and the struggles and how that goes. So where do you see the balance between brands providing an effective creative brief for an influencer and kind of over-prescribing what we need them to do and layering on too many tasks?
Do you want the long version or the short version?
Let's go with the long version.
Well, definitely the Open Influence team is very familiar with our creative process. It's not easy. I think it's one of the hardest parts of launching an influencer campaign. Our clients are very detailed. They want to include everything. They have a lot of mandates. They have a lot of like rules and regulations. Everyone gets involved, like their legal teams, the brand teams. So I think it gets to a point where we tend to lose that authenticity, and we tend to force things on influencers. So definitely it's a very thin line between following what the client wants to do and also letting the influencer have some creative freedom.
And just adding my 2 cents to your comment, I think that is exactly what we see in YouTube or in YouTube spaces here in LA. Sometimes kind of like brands and agencies coming with a very complete briefing and then kind of like removing the creativity or removing all the natural aspects of a creator or an influencer. So I totally agree, and I think that basically my thoughts are every time we're thinking about working with creators/influencers, we need to understand that they are brands themselves instead of shaping them into a very small box and kind of like giving a very strict briefing. So yeah, I think that's really important, especially for agencies or brands represented here. I think that as much as we give creativity freedom or creative freedom for influencers, the better the campaigns could be. So
Do you find there to be, working within the Latin market as well as the U.S. market, what are the sort of challenges between briefing in, dueling markets, so to speak?
The first challenge, budgets. We have less budget. Multicultural always gets impacted when budgets are cut. So definitely budget. And then also finding multicultural influencers is not as easy as finding general market influencers, and also finding the right multicultural influence. I think someone talked about it earlier, making sure that they're clean, making sure that they don't have any violence, that they don't have any political views, especially with this political climate and with a lot of things going on, especially in the Hispanic market. So I think that becomes a challenge for us. But I would say the main challenge would be budgets.
Yeah, I would say that also, decision makers, they are not necessarily multicultural, and sometimes I think they're kind of like making decisions on behalf of many other markets. And managing US, Canada, and Brazil, for example, I see a lot of differences in regulation. So things are allowed in Brazil. Like a creator can be sometimes very creative and do a lot of fun and make comments even on sensitive topics. And when it comes to the US market, for example, it's much more strict. So I think it's really important for who's managing the campaign or whoever's kind of like leading the decision to have a broader view of all the markets that they are working with.
Nice. So I guess, Leo, one thing to build off of kind of what you were saying, the dynamic between brands and agencies developing creative strategies and sort of, hand-feeding the brief to the influencers versus this sort of new emergence of influencers really helping brands develop the actual creative strategies from the ground up and sort of being co-creators. How do you see that sort of impacting the kind of influencer landscape from a creative development standpoint?
I think that this is kind of like the best thing that can happen in terms of the creative process. So as soon and as early as the creator kind of like joins the creative process with the agency or with the brand, I think that the more authentic the campaign will be. So what I see right now is, of course, influencers, they understood that they are brands and that they are companies and that they are becoming really professional. And I think they are also positioning themselves as part of this creative process, not only the final asset. And I think they're also consumers. So I think it's really what I see, and maybe answering your question, but the change that I see happening right now, and I'm happy that this is happening, is kind of like they are much more inside the companies or inside agencies, literally giving opinions and being part of the creative process instead of just being hired and with a briefing and just saying, do this 3 things here. So that's what I'm seeing. Again, it's still a small portion of the market who's doing this, but I think I see a great trend on incorporating creators on earlier stages.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I come from a much more sort of traditional ad background, and a couple years ago made the transition over to the influencer space. And one thing I remember very clearly is we would develop really great creative strategies, creative concepts, ideas for major brands, and then the influencer would sort of be tacked on at the end. It's like, we need influencers. How are we going to get our reach? We need the influencers. And now it's much more, starting with influencer-first creative strategies and having them actually be the content creators, developers themselves.
Yeah, and I think that they can be very creative with basic things and existing things. I remember being in a big brainstorm recently with brands from Europe, and during the brainstorm, a creator basically brought up some content that he produced the day before in Venice. And they were like, but how did you get the permits, or how did you get the authorization to do everything you did in Venice, right? We are in LA, we are in Venice Beach, it's always crowded. And this German creator, his answer was basically, I woke up early. So it was so natural for him saying, I got the camera, I woke up early, I went, and I did it. And I think that brands, both the brand and the agency present in the room, they were like brainstorming how to do that. You know what I mean? Like kind of like overcomplicating or over-engineering the process. And he basically...
Wait, an agency over-engineered the creative process to get to an idea? That's never been heard of before.
Yeah, I think that's the type of energy and innovation that sometimes they bring, or even I've seen things like kind of like them challenging the status quo in terms of why do I need to be on suits or kind of like doing a very professional approach for this type of car versus the other type of car, kind of like being more focused for, I don't know, young people. So he was like, I'm a 21, I'm a creator, and I have enough money to buy the premium cars. So why are you targeting the premium cars for executives and successful people and not necessarily for the new generation of potential buyers, you know? So it's really nice when a 20-ish, 30-ish influencer challenges, I don't know, executives or people with sometimes 20 or 30 years in their roles in the company. So that's really interesting.
And Karla, I think you and I were talking earlier that you've kind of experienced a similar type thing in sort of navigating the waters between the demands that brands have and the content creators just saying, well, I woke up early and I got it done. Mm-hmm. You know, how does that sort of, how do you work your way through, you know, sort of being the brand manager as well as sort of the influencer cat wrangler, so to speak?
So I think Leo used a very good word, overcomplicating. I think our clients tend to overcomplicate stuff a lot. And I think if it's our job as an agency, they would like to train them and to provide that education. Like, this is what influencer marketing is. This is what influencers do. This is why they need to be doing the stuff that they need to be doing, or why they push back on certain things. So I think it's been very tough lately to really get that message across and get them to understand. Like, for instance, an example too, we have a client, a pizza client, and this client wanted to activate an influencer, and they wanted hosting around like girls' night. And the influencer came back and said, no, I'm doing like a family night because I know that my audience relates to that. That's my content. And we're like, we're totally fine as long as, you know, we follow the brand mandates, we follow what the client wants to say, and you like tackle these like 5 talking points, like we're fine. Like when we communicated that to client, and even with the internal teams, they're like, why? And we're like, because she knows her audience. She's been nurturing this audience. Her audience listens to her, and she cares about her audience. Of course, she wants to give quality content, and it needs to be a win-win relationship. And they ended up accepting her concept, but it was a lot of back and forth. I don't know if Lenny is here, but he's been in all the emails, so he knows.
And I think that there's also kind of like the opportunity right now for me is, I think we have in one side creators and brands, creators and influencers, sometimes not as professional as they need to be to sell for the Unilevers, J&Js, and P&Gs of life.
The bigger networks.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that the missing gap between those two elements is how do we apport professionalism and how do we position creators and influencers and bring all their data or their experience and kind of like sell this to brands in a professional way with accountability and all the necessary information that a business or a decision maker in P&G, L'Oreal, whoever's needs. So I think that's the opportunity, kind of like professionalizing, if that word exists, this in-between relationship.
No, I mean, you know, and I think that like segues great into our next subject, which is basically the notion that, you know, audiences do love their influencers. They're very passionate about them. They love what they share. You know, and at times it's not always comfortable for brands. Brands are, you know, like, I think it was mentioned earlier, you know, is that okay if I get in on this conversation, or can I, does it feel like borrowed interest if I sort of inject myself here and sort of, you know, what's right for the brand, where do I need to be cautious? You know, the influencers do foster this continual relationship with their audiences, which is why they're so valuable. They create new formats that inspire us all to get more creative. Being a creative myself, I always get jealous when I see somebody come up with one of these amazing ideas and you're like, it was so simple and they just nailed it. And then you have to try and figure out a way to one-up them, and you generally fail miserably because you're representing a brand. But, they just understand the digital space, especially these younger generations. So has the democratization of creativity and content creators' control over the social landscape sort of transformed the way brands think about traditionally the big idea or the good idea? What's a great idea?
Definitely. I think, and we see it also with brands, maybe spending less money on their creatives, or making more raw content, more behind the scenes content, more content that looks authentic. Again, I think we all know when someone is selling us something. So if we can find a way to tell our story and to put our brand in a contextual way, I think it's going to be more appealing to the consumers. We're going to be less intrusive, because at the end of the day, people want to be entertained on social. They don't want to be sold. So how are we going to make an impact in their newsfeed? How are we going to insert ourselves in those conversations already happening and not be intrusive?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that one business will not necessarily compete with the other. I mean, for me, Super Bowl will always exist, and it will be always the campaign that we will remember. But then there's other 364 opportunities throughout the year that are kind of floating, and that's where I think we need to be creative and kind of approach those opportunities. So I believe in kind of the two businesses, but I'm a big fan of the simpler, faster, and let's do more. And then you become creative by trying many things, and of course you will fail throughout the way, throughout the path. But that's fine.
Is it okay for a brand to fail
think
in a social landscape with the memory of a fish?
As long as you don't have a PR crisis, I think it's fine. I think social is a lot of test and learn. What worked yesterday might not work today. I remember it used to be a 15-second video. Now it's a 6-second video. And then tomorrow is going to be a 3-second video. And then best practice is insert your brand within the first second, and then insert your brand within the, what's going to be next. I think it's social is a lot of test and learn. As long as you're not creating a crisis for your brand, I think it's okay.
Yeah. And also, I think that if the creative process is being held in a co-creation approach with insights from influencers, or even sometimes insights from consumers, I think that the chances of doing a huge mistake are really low. And even if something goes wrong, I think if it's authentic, if the content was original and the intention was good, I think there's room for consumers to excuse. So I really think it's part of the process, and that's why we're talking about the fail fast, learn fast, and then kind of move ahead. So yeah,
the sort of test and learn type mentality.
Yeah.
Right? When I personally sort of dove into the influencer space, the way people handled influencers and the way that we sort of approached them was very different. And now, we have more and more brands embracing that landscape, coming to us saying, we want a full 2019 strategy versus we want to do these one-off sort of campaigns or these one-hitters. We don't want influencers, we want brand ambassadors that are sort of long-lasting relationships that are sort of part of our identity and that really represent our brand well. So over the next, and I see that happening over the past 6 months, so where do you guys think over the next 6 months, the next 12 months, this super rapidly developing landscape is going to go from a creative ideation and development sort of standpoint?
I would say within the next month, not even 6 months. I think having influencers as brand ambassadors and having those long-lasting relationships, again, just creates that trust and credibility for the brand. And I think if these influencers get contacted by multiple brands all the time. So if you are able to secure that exclusivity, that means that they want to partner with you. They see value in partnering with your brand. They know that their audience is gonna like the content that they're producing with you. So I think having those relationships, we've had it with some of our clients. Some of our clients have activated multiple campaigns with us at Open Influence, and we've activated similar influences, for a couple of campaigns because they deliver, because the client likes the content that they produce, and their audience also reacts to the content that they're producing. So it's a win-win relationship.
And that's kind of the professionalism that you were talking about earlier as well. Like having that degree of professionalism is important.
Yeah, and also I think that the next step is literally each time more we kind of like feeling that we are doing business with people and that we are represented in the ads or commercials, whatever. So I think that everything I heard this afternoon here was around authenticity and kind of like being honest and being real. And I think that's all about YouTube, for example. The reason why people watch YouTube is because they identify themselves with the person who's talking in front of the camera. And also, I don't know, I think that every time you feel that there's someone behind the brand, it gives a lot of trust for you and a lot of identity as well. So to me, that's the next phase.
Awesome. So the last sort of topic I want to dig into, which is very near and dear to my heart being a creative, which is big data versus big ideas, right? And great ideas. So, data is what marketers love the most. Now that we've been able to, scrape all of this data from all the different social platforms, from all the different influencers, you can really measure what ideas resonate with audiences, regardless of whether some people might think it's a good idea or not. It's what resonates, and that's really what matters. Do you guys think that the application of all of this data when it comes to developing creative ideas is transformational, helpful, damaging? What are the ways that you kind of see that impacting, creativity and ideas?
I would say it is not kind of like damaging at all. I would say it's exactly what we need. And it goes back to my point of bringing professionalism and literally bringing more data and more content and some material behind just a creative idea. So I think that's actually really good when a creator or an influencer puts a very good idea and there's data behind to support. I think that's a win-win model. So that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Data is super important. I think it's important for brands. It's important for creators because at the end of the day, they know their audience and they want to make sure that they are creating, campaigns that will resonate and will make an impact. So as long as we are able to use that data in a good way and not to use that data as something set in stone and that's what we use all the time. And that's also one thing that we've seen as a challenge. Just because something worked one time, that doesn't mean that it has to work all the time. So be open to exploring other creative venues, exploring other opportunities, and see how your data evolves.
Yeah,
I would say, and I think it's also our job and our challenge here, kind of creating new data as well, or new ways of measuring data. Because every time we talk about influencers or creators, we are automatically talking about passion. And this is something really hard to metrify. So when I see the Instagrammer that I really love, kind of marketing something and I want to buy because of her, because of him. So how do we track this? I don't know, I've seen meetups or huddles where a creator just says, I'll be there, show up, and we're going to talk. And there's thousands of people. Right. So I think that when it comes to brands, how do we metrify this or how do we quantify this impact? So that's something huge.
One of the things that we've been sort of applying internally at Open Influence is this notion of informed creative. So it's essentially having all of this data at our disposal, identifying what is really successful for an influencer, and then really digging down into it and identifying all the attributes that make that content successful. So if influencer Susie is really popular for going hiking or being an outdoorsy type person, but we've also been able to see that whenever she has a waterfall in the back of her posts, that it over-indexes. So we've been able to actually partner with influencers and help with the briefs we provide them have the content that they've created, actually perform better than some of their other content. So do you think that there's a little bit of a two-way street between, influencers hungry to build their own brands off of the brands that they partner with, as well as brands building, their fan base off the backs of the influencers?
Again, I think it all goes back to the win-win relationship. The influencer wants to partner with you, that's great, but how are you adding value to their newsfeed? How are they adding value to your brand? So I think that I think influencers are very smart. I remember when influencers or bloggers were a thing, like our clients were questioning, why are we going after influencers? Who are these people? So I think they're smart now. They know who they want to partner with, and they know the reasons why they want to partner with the brand. So how are you adding value to them? How are they adding value to your brand? And how can they be part of that creative process? So it's a win-win relationship.
Awesome. Well, I think we only have a couple minutes left, but does anyone out in the audience have any questions that you maybe want to pose to us for the last couple minutes or anything like that? No question? Yeah.
Question. Someone who's trying to improve their brand's YouTube channel, what are some best practices for that?
For someone, can you repeat the question?
Trying to improve their YouTube strategy.
As a brand, so I think it relates with most of the things that we talked here about partnering with influencers or partnering with creators that are really connected with your brand and authentic to the type of content that you create. I would never recommend go after the huge ones if they are not related to your brand. So I think that the short answer is everyone goes to YouTube to consume authentic content and content that they relate themselves with. And of course, sometimes they will relate themselves with a lot of brands. So I would say go towards those who are really connected with your business and your brand, and grow through their power. Use their audience, use their knowledge, use their fans to strengthen your brand presence on YouTube.
Are there? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to quickly add to the best practice questions, because we get asked that a lot. Like, what's the best practice? I was listening to a podcast recently, and they said, don't let a platform dictate your best practices. I think what works for you might not work for the other brand. So what works for you is what you should be doing. A good example is our client wanted a video to be 9 seconds because that's what the media agency was saying was best practice. The influencer went live with one 9-second video, and he went live with a 15-second video. The 15-second outperformed the 9-second video. So that was a good learning for them. Like, your media agency is telling you to stay within the 9 seconds and show your product within the first 3 seconds, but the influencer had better performance with a 15-second video. So I think a platform should not dictate a best practice. It's a combination of good creative and what works for your brand.
Awesome. Can we take one more? Yeah, we'll take one more question. Yeah, please.
A lot of influencers I'm talking to from all over the world, by the way, US, Europe, Eastern Europe, everywhere, saying the same thing, that Instagram has really slowed down.
Yeah.
The growth has really
the algorithms
the algorithms, and it became really frustrating for brands and for influencers, for content creators to really do anything, because, for example, I create really beautiful content, I have a whole team doing it, I go out on shoots, it's flying to it, and then at the end it's and I'm not the only one who's doing it. So is there there a reason for it? Is there something influencers can do? Is there anything brands can do to kind of like?
So this is something that I've been dealing a lot with lately, and it's a very fair question. I mean, the algorithms from Instagram are changing, weekly. It seems like every time it goes down, they're updating something new. And you can, if you watch a feed, obsessively, like sometimes I do for various brands, you do see what appears to be things getting throttled back a little bit, and you're like, why is this happening? The one thing that I have seen is that it seems to be a trend that when you leverage some of the new features on Instagram, whether it's stories, whether it's IGTV, whether it's some of the new things that they're talking about introducing at I8, like the donation sticker feature, those things, they tend to seem to reward, especially when you're a brand. And so a lot of times when I have experimented with that for particular brands, I have seen bumps that come through. Now, this is all conspiracy theory, so I have no true science to base it on, but other than just experimentation and trial. So one thing I would definitely recommend is really using the features of the app, and in particular as a brand, they want to use it as a media platform, as a place to buy and buy ads and spend money. So the more you leverage into all of their features, the likelihood of being rewarded gets a little bit higher. So.
Instagram stories.
Yeah,
I love Instagram.
Stories, lots of stories, lots of IGTV, all that stuff. So we're into it.
Other platforms.
Or other platforms. YouTube. Use YouTube.
I'm not saying.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank
We're getting
you.
booted.